We've constructed histograms using categorical data. I'd like to construct a histogram now by using a continuous data set, which is very different. Right? The categories and categorical data presented themselves, we're going to have to create categories. The easiest way to do this with Excel is to use the idea of a pivot table. And I'm going to highlight all of the data that's in this particular table. This data, you'll see it again, it's on problem 18 of the homework in chapter 2. So let's work with it for just a minute. After I highlight all the data, what I want to do is I'm going to insert, and I'm going to come over here instead of the pivot table here. I'm going to come over here because I want a chart too. I'm going to take the pivot chart, and I want the chart and the table. I've highlighted the data where everything lives. It's over here still. I want to now put it somewhere inside this existing worksheet. So let's get this pivot table started. I'm going to just put it right here and starting in column F2, pushing OK. Okay, now I can start constructing a pivot data. A pivot table, and it's going to automatically translate over into a pivot chart. And I remember when using a count data, the most obvious chart is the histogram. So we'll see what this defaults to as we work. First off, the numbers, or the part of the table that I'm interested in, is the points per game column, column C. And so when I create my table, I'm going to have a table that has rows measuring points per game. So I'll just grab the points per game, drag it down here into the axis category, and notice the row labels show up, giving me what would be axis labels. Now I'm also trying to count the points per game, average points per game. So I need to slip this down to the values that I want in my table. Now notice that it automatically chose to sum the points per game for each category. Now that's not really all that helpful, right? I don't want the sum. What I want is the count. So the number of times any given number, like 16.7 points per game, if that occurs more than once, I want to count it as more than once. So I'm going to click on this drop-down menu, which is going to open up this box, and value field settings. Alright, now I have choices. See, sum was on the top of the list, continuous data, not categorical, and so it defaulted to sum, but I do want the count. So I'm going to go ahead and choose count and then click OK. Now is this much more helpful, excuse me? Well, not really. It still has every data point, every point per game average as a possible category. Well, I want to get rid of that. I want to create some categories. So I'm going to put my cursor, see that thick arrow, anywhere in here, and right click. And see there's this group and ungroup categories. I'm going to go with grouping. Okay. Well, this thing tells me that my smallest value in the column row labels is 11.7. Well, then I'm going to start my groupings at 11. And my largest value is 28.8. Well, I am going to push that to 29. And then how big do I want my groupings to be? Well, what do you want? Do I want it groupings of 2? So that's going to go from 11 to 13 to 15 to 17 to 19 and so on. That's big enough. Let's try it out. Okay. Notice that as I created my categories, the count of, so in the average points per game between 17 and 19 points, there are 18 people in this column of points per game, so I get that count correctly like I want it. Well, I also get a picture. Okay. I also get a picture. Now this is the histogram that goes with this table. So notice it looks very much like the categorical data that we studied in the last module. Alright, so in order to get categories, go to the column underneath the row labels, right click, choose the groupings. And you can always go in and reschedule or repurpose this if you want, if your groupings are not what you wanted. Alright, now I want to go over one more thing while I've got you here. I'm going to create a new pivot table. And the reason is because if I continue with the pivot table I have and create more rows, it's going to create more picture, and I don't want more picture. I just want a table that I'm going to do a couple of different things with. Let's just kind of watch and see. Okay, so create the pivot table. I'm going to place it right here. I'm going to start the same thing. I want the points per game as my rows. See, it stuck with what I had up there. I want points per game as my values, and it's going to stick with the count. Well, I want to expand this table. What if I want the percent frequency? Okay, well, let me grab this again, the average points per game, drag it back down here into the values section again. See, now I've got two rows that essentially are identical. But let's go to this count of points per game too. Use the drop-down box, value field settings. Notice I've got this thing that says show values as. Let's go looking over there. And I have some choices in this drop-down. See, no calculation right here? Well, now I've got all kinds of things I could do. I could do the percent of the column total. That's what I want. That's the relative frequency. So I'll put in the percent. Well, if I, by the way, that's actually going to give me a percentage. It's going to have the decimal in the wrong place. So now I'm going to come down here to this number format, and I'm going to say, no, I don't want a percentage. I just want a number. And I'm going to click OK and OK again. And now I have a frequency distribution. So in my table, I have the distribution. Now the frequency distribution. Alright, well, by the way, if I want to rename this, let me go back to here. Maybe I should have done this earlier. I can rename that here. I could do this frequency distribution. There, now my column is renamed. Well, what if I want the cumulative distribution? So, you know, my first number here would be 0.04. 0.04 plus 0.1, that sum plus this, etc., etc. I'll go back to my pivot table options, and again pull that points per game down, get my value field settings, show values as. Well, let's see what my options are. Running total. Let's try this running total. Let's name this, since running total is also referred to as a cumulative frequency. And let's test this out. I got a running total of the original data. Okay, so let's try it again. Maybe I don't want the running total of the original data. Maybe I want the running total in percent. And not the percent, but just numbers. Let's try this again. There, now I've got the cumulative distribution. So this 0.14 is just the sum of my frequency distribution's first two categories. 0.38 is the sum in the first three categories, etc. Thank you, and I hope this is helpful.